Thank you for listening. This is the Legends Podcast by All Day Vinyl, and I'm your host, Scott Doubleson. After you finish this episode, please subscribe, rate it, and please check us out on Instagram at All Day Vinyl. Today, I'm here with a legend, an amazing producer, an engineer, mixer. He's recorded some of my favorite albums of all time: Time Out of Mind and No Mercy by Bob Dylan, Lanois by Neil Young, Tom Waits, Real Gone. Produced my favorite Lucinda Williams album, World Without Tears. And recorded and mixed Emmylou Harris's Wrecking Ball and so many others.
Okay.
I want to introduce my guest here, Mark Howard.
Thank you, Scott, for having me over.
So Mark has been a recorder, a producer, a mixer, a guerrilla. How do you describe yourself? A guerrilla
recordist.
A guerrilla recordist for well over 30 plus years, almost 40 years.
Yep.
And one of Mark's key innovations in the world of recording is taking musicians out of the studio and putting them into homes and places,
locations,
spaces.
and spaces. Yeah.
So talk to me a little about how the history of spaces, what was being done before you, and how you've taken this to another level.
So it kind of all started for me in New Orleans, where I got asked to come to New Orleans to make a record with the Neville Brothers. And Daniel Lanois was a producer of that record at the time, and he asked me to come to New Orleans to help him set up a studio. And so I thought he meant a truck, and so had it in my mind I was going to do a recording truck. But when I got there, he said we're going to just rent a place and make the record inside of there. And so that's kind of how it started for me, and I haven't been able to shake it since. So every location I find a cool house or some kind of atmosphere, and I just have all my own gear. It was Daniel's gear in the beginning. And now I just kind of find the location set up. Usually they're more like music camps where the artist stays there and all the musicians. And so everybody's all under one roof. And that way you can live the record also. So it's an interesting concept. And I just don't like to work in normal studios because of isolation and communication. So with communication, I can easily say to you, Scott, can you, just sing a little bit higher in this section? Or, but if I'm in a recording studio, I got to press a button, goes to a set of phones, you don't have them on, and I got to run out there. It just complicates communication, where having you right beside me is direct, bang. And so that part of it is key for me. And I get really frustrated when I go into studios and can't get, through to the artist, or just for a simple comment, it's frustrating. So this way I'm in the room with the band, and I've developed, I didn't really develop it, but I record with the speakers on, and I make it more like like you would live, And so I usually have a pretty big sound system with like 18-inch subwoofers and like a stack of speakers. And so when you record it, I play it back loud, and it moves the pressure. And as you're recording, you can hear yourself, and I got effects on you, and it creates this vibe that when you're recording, you're in this kind of bubble instead of like being in headphones and isolated. This way you're excited, And so this has developed a way which I'm calling guerrilla recording. And because most people don't want to have speakers on or have leakage. And I use all that to my advantage in a way that it's some of my best drum sounds that I've ever gotten came out of the vocal mic. And even with the delay on it, it's like they sounded cool. And so I think the accidents that happen this way are more interesting than when you work in a recording studio and everything is, you do everything the same way all the time. Everything's so dry and dead and boring sounding. This way, it's really exciting off the floor. And, it really gives the impression to the artist that they sound great.
And let's touch on that first location you mentioned, which was in New Orleans, which you did with the Neville Brothers.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that this was the first time the Neville Brothers have recorded outside of a studio context.
It is, yeah.
And that was the Yellow Moon album, which is a great album. And it had, I believe, a really great cover of Bob Dylan's God on Our Side.
Yeah, there was a beautiful cover.
Beautiful cover. And I say that to lead into that New Orleans house is where Bob Dylan, you and Daniel Lanois recorded Oh Mercy.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So how did this come about where Dylan, who assuming also didn't record outside of studios,
Right.
came about to New Orleans and landed with y'all
Yeah.
to
So, we were just finishing up the Neville Brothers Yellow Moon, and Bob Dylan had come through town to play a show there at the zoo, Ottoman Zoo. And so Bono had been talking to Dylan and saying that he should try making a record with this guy, Daniel Lanois. And so the management set up a meeting. We went to the show and we met Bob after his show, and we went on his bus. Usually Bob walks off the stage into a car and gone. And this time there was a bus there. And so we met him. He invited us on the bus and he asked us what we were doing here. And we said, we're making this record with the Neville Brothers. And he asked, what's that like? And I said, well, Dan had said, we covered a couple of your songs and Hollis Brown and God on Your Side. And Dylan said, well, what's that like? And Aaron Neville was singing God on Our Side. It's stunning.
incredible.
Yeah. And so Bob said he'd come over to the studio the next day to have a listen before he left town. And so he came over, he heard it, and he really dug it. So Dan and him said they'd make a record. And so Dylan left. And so Dan wanted to go to New Mexico, Santa Fe, New Mexico, to make his record there. And so he flew me to New Mexico, and I videotaped a bunch of these beautiful houses, adobe houses. And I found a really beautiful one, George O'Keeffe's house. And I thought that would be the killer house to make the record in. And so I videotaped it, came back to New Orleans and showed Dan, and he loved it. And then he got on the phone with Bob and said, we found a beautiful place in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's George O'Keeffe's house. Be a great place to make your record. And Bob goes, Santa Fe, New Mexico. What are you talking about? The altitude is too high. You can't sing that high. It's like you get dizzy, So ended up, Dan says, well, you know what? Why don't we just make your record here in New Orleans? It's below sea level, and I think we'll make a cool record here. So I had the Neville Brothers record. I made it in this kind of like apartment building. And so I had to get out of there because I only rented it for 6 months. And then I found this other beautiful kind of like Victorian house in the Garden District. And that's where we made the Oh Mercy record.
How was he affected by working in a space like that?
Well, if you remember, Dan had asked him, so Bob, what do you think about like recording like this in the house? He goes, what are you talking about? I've been doing this for years, the big pink, the whole house. And so like, that whole scene,
right.
They invented it in a little way. Right. And we were just carrying on with the tradition, but he dug it and he felt really comfortable that way. It was an interesting time for him. I think, what was his last record? Like
Empire Burlesque.
Right. What was that? They thought he was a Christian record.
That was Infidel.
So
those are great records. By the way.
Yeah. So he kind of come out of that period, and not that those records weren't great or anything, but I think the Oh Mercy record was kind of a change for him. And so where he was writing in his head, Dan was asking him if he could, write a song like, one of the classics or whatever. And he goes, I don't know who that guy is anymore. I don't know what that is all about. And like those songs just came to me and now they're gone. And so and so he had all these new songs. And so it was like a new chapter for him, and we caught it. And so I think it was kind of cool.
And when you guys got the songs to listen to before you ultimately recorded, were those the sessions with Ron Wood, or did that happen at a different time?
Yeah, it was kind of odd. Dylan had sent a cassette of something for us to listen to, and we thought it may have been the Ron Wood sessions to hear the songs, but it wasn't. And it was like some other blues singer that he sent a cassette of that he wanted to like be like, or Al Jolson, something like that. And so I thought that was kind of bizarre, but later on I got why he sent it, and it was more about phrasing and stuff like that. which was important. Yeah. Yeah. So,
And it was a very creatively brutal partnership between you, Dylan, Mark, and Lanois.
yeah,
But it was also, there was a lot of conflict, I understand.
there was, in the beginning, it's like, Bob, we didn't know Bob and he didn't know us. And so we just had to, find our boundaries and what we can get with him and what we can't. And so things got a little bit, you know, not shaky, but, just communication wasn't quite there. And I think we were being tested and we were testing him. So at one point, Bob, would just play sloppily and just, he wasn't like, I'd put the microphone in front of him and he'd turn over here. And so I put the microphone over here and he'd turn over here. And same thing, he'd get up and go in the other room and play the piano. I moved all the drums to the other room and he'd get up and come back into the kitchen. And it was like, so I was just following him like this lost dog. And so, yeah, so it was interesting. Lanois, he's very passionate with his music and he really wants to get something out of people, but his things that he does as a producer work with certain people, but it didn't work with Bob. And he's more like a cheerleader. He likes to cheer people on and, like as they're playing, he'll be, using a tambourine or just something to create an energy in the room. That didn't work with Bob. He didn't get it, or I don't think that worked for him. And so maybe Lanois and him didn't see eye to eye on a couple of things. And so it got heated for a minute and Lanois lost his mind and grabbed a dobro and smashed it over this floor wedge because Dylan wouldn't wear headphones. So I had like these floor wedges you have like live. He smashed it over this right in front, like as close as we are. Bang. And so I just thought, oh shit, what's going on? I just got up and walked outside, went into the guest house to get a drink. And I thought, okay, they'll work it out if they don't kill each other. And so I heard the gate open and close. I guess that was Dylan leaving. And I went in there back into the studio and Dan was gone and Dobro was laying on the floor with a big, huge dent in it. And so it was kind of, thinking, oh, geez, what's happened? Are we still going to make the record? And so the next day, Dylan came in like nothing had happened, and same with Lanois. And so suddenly, Bob was a different, he's a little more open to us. And so, like maybe for the first 2 weeks, he didn't even acknowledge I was in the room. And because I'm a motorcycle enthusiast and I like, vintage Harley Davidsons and other motorcycles. And he saw that I had a couple in the courtyard and he asked, he goes, hey, Mark, can you get me one of those? And I said, yeah, I think so. And so I went to Florida, or actually I called my friend in Florida who I got a couple of bikes from in the past. And I said, I'm looking for a bike. And so he sent me some photos. And so I had this little Polaroid of this beautiful 1966 Harley Davidson Electric Glide. So he sent it to me and I give it to Bob and Bob put it on his like little table that he works with. And he just kept looking at it and he goes, I want that one. So I went to on the weekend, I went to Florida and picked a bike up and where was it? Destin or somewhere like that. And so, yeah, so after that, we were friends and we talked on motorcycle culture and stuff like that. And so when he came in, I would take him out for rides and show him, okay, this is a good place. We go up to the levee. We can get out onto this highway and this goes all the antebellum mansions. And so I showed him how to get out without, getting too caught up. And then one day he would start to go out by himself in the morning. And I said, Bob, oh, he said to me, he goes, the police are very friendly. They're always waving at me. I said, well, Bob, like in California, there's no helmet law, but there's a helmet law here. And so you need to wear a helmet and the cops are just waving at you to put a helmet on. So I thought that was pretty strange. And then another time I heard him take the bike out of the gate and heard him drive around the corner and then the bike stalled. And I thought, what's going on? And by the time I walked around the corner, there was like 3 people standing in front of him. Hey, Bob, can we have your autograph? And so I walked up and he just sat on the bike, like straight ahead, like there was nobody there. And I thought, I just told the people, but leave the guy alone. And so I walked up, I check the bike, and he forgot to turn the petcock on for the gas. So I turned that on, started it back up, and then he took off again. So it was a interesting kind of a thing between me and him, with motorcycles. And he trusted me with some of his music, and what do you think of this line? And I thought that was pretty cool, where if anybody else would have did it, he wouldn't listen to them, because I would just give him, I was being truthful, where I think a lot of people would say, yeah, that's great, or blow smoke up your ass. And he's used, but so I would be honest. And so he respected that. And that really helped me for Time Out of Mind. That was another kind of chapter that I did with him. And I kind of came in, already seasoned.
He clearly, valued you I think when he won, was it the Grammy or an Academy Award?
The Grammy, yeah.
The Grammy, he specifically shouted you out.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
And that was on Time Out of Mind.
Yeah, correct? Time Out of Mind.
So let's talk about that. So after recording Oh Mercy, very critically acclaimed album, it's one of the greats of his catalog at this point. That conflict that you alluded to clearly made some great art. And I think Dylan did an interview once. He did an interview once where that Dobro story was mentioned. And his comment was, I don't mind people smashing guitars as long as it's not my guitar. So it sounded like, and from what you said, that after, it was a whole different vibe. That might have been the jolt that you'd like him needed.
Exactly.
And so 10 years later, 8 years later, you're going to do Time Out of Mind. How does that come about, and where are you recording that?
At that time, I was in Oxnard, California. I'd rented an old 1940s Mexican porno cinema that had been dilapidated and closed for many years. And I turned it into a studio, and I took out all the seats and kind of, spray painted all the curtains black and made a cool vibe in there. And so I was working out of there, and I had a deal at that time with Lanois that I would supply the location, and he would supply the gear. So Dan had all his gear. He let me use, to put in there. And so we had this thing where he had 6 months, I had 6 months. So I'd make some records and he'd make some records. And so it was at that time, Dylan had asked if I could mix this live show that he did it in Atlanta for the Olympics. And I think that was 96, 97. I can't remember. One of those. When was the Olympics? Or somewhere
96.
96, yeah. So I mixed that for him, and he would drive up every day from Point Dune, where he lives. And he just come up in a pickup truck by himself, no security, nothing. So it was kind of cool. He could just walk around the town and nobody knows who he is. And he had the freedom to do whatever he wanted. So that was cool. So right after I had finished mixing that live show, one of the last songs, Bob said, there's harmonica on this last song. I said, okay, cool. And he goes, do you think you can make it sound electric? I said, yeah, I think I can. And so I took it was done in his vocal channel. And so I just ran his vocal channel into like a little tube screamer distortion pedal and into a little tweed amp, then mic'd that and brought that back up on a fader. And so when he heard that sound, he really loved it. And he goes, oh, it's amazing. I want that on all the songs. So I had to remix the whole live record to put that sound on there. And that sound became what I called the vocal amp. And so that was at the time of, after that was the beginning of Time Out of Mind. And so he would come in, and while we were doing these mixes, and he goes, Daniel, I want you to listen to this song. And he played on the piano, but he never sang anything. Dan said, yeah, that's great, but I need to hear the song. And so the next day, Dylan said, oh, I got this other song. I want you to hear it. So he plays it and, doesn't sing anything. Dan says, I really like this one, but I'd like to hear the lyrics of this one. And so he didn't sing anything. And then the next day, we had a friend from New York that came in because Dylan was interested in doing some stuff. He goes, that kid Beck, I really like his record. I'd like to make a record like that. And Dan says, yeah, we do that. We do loops and all this kind of stuff. And so that's why we brought in Tony Mangorian. He was from New York, and he's a drummer, and he does all that kind of stuff. And so, so the next day, Tony's there and Bob's there, and Bob comes in and he starts playing this kind of gospel vibe on the piano. And Tony just goes to the kit and he just kind of plays this like hip hop thing along with it. And so Dylan's playing this gospel chords and Tony's playing this groove. And then he starts to sing, and I'm always recording, like, everything's always mic'd, and you go anywhere close in that room and I gotcha. And so I put the machine in the record, and so then he starts to sing, I can't wait, and so, so it's this like gospel hip hop version of Can't Wait. And it's like amazing. And so, but he only sings a verse and a chorus. And so I just took that and made it into like a song. I just copied the verse into the next verse and chorus, so that way you could listen to it as a song. And so that became the kind of template of where we were going with the record. And Bob, when he would drive in every day, he was listening to this old blues record radio station. And he says, why do those records sound so great? Like I says, they're very limited, into microphones and what they used in those days. And he goes, why can't my record sound like that? And I told him, yeah, it can. We just got to use that approach, and less is more, the less microphones you have, the bigger it kind of sounds. And these days, it's like 21 mics on the drums alone. And that all comes down to like small sound, where if you use one ribbon on it, it's like John Bonham, big sounding. And so yeah, so the song Can't Wait was kind of like, that was the pinnacle of how it kind of started. We got this beautiful, cool vibe going on. And, we did a couple other, songs, I think Mississippi and maybe something else that he let us hear. And so, yeah, it's great. Let's make a record. And so Bob was excited about it, and we were all ready to go. And the teatro was like amazing sounding in there. It just was like, you go close to anything and you play it, sounds incredible. And Dylan says, well, yeah, but this is too close to home to make it. He goes, I want to go to Miami. And so I packed up all the consoles, all my mics, everything that I was using. And we went to Criteria recording studio in Miami. And that's where a lot of big records had been made, and Oceans by Eric Clapton, and who else?
Stills recorded.
Stills, yep, and
a lot of the 70s.
Yeah.
Was that Tom Dowd?
Tom Dowd, yep. So we went there. I thought, okay, well, this is cool, Yeah. And so we get there, and suddenly that room is no longer available where those records were made. Now that's their tape vault.
Really?
And so they got this big, huge video room, big room, big spitty room. Sounded like shit in there. And so I set everything up, and it was just sounding really bad. I just said, we got to get out of here. This doesn't sound good. And so I started looking for other locations around Miami, and I actually called, who were they? Who's that band from Miami? The four brothers from Australia.
Bee Gees.
Bee Gees, yeah. I called the Bee Gees because they had a studio there, and they said, no, we don't rent our place out. And I found a Masonic temple. I thought we could make it in there. That'd be cool. But it didn't pan out, and I just had to like work with what I had. And so for Bob, I built this like little tiny apartment out of gobos, and like he had a door, and so he had his own little spot that he could hide out. And I put a lamp in there, got some cool lighting. And so we made the whole record in this room, and it was like 15 people, and it got crazy in the way of Bob doesn't write the song on a piano or a guitar. He writes it on a typewriter or on paper sometime, or it's in his head. And so he doesn't know what key his voice sounds best in. So he likes to change every take he would change the key. So with musicians, when you change a key, it's like relearning the song. It's like your hands are in a different position. And so for a lot of we had some of the best players on the floor out there with him. And when he changed the key, it was just like really bad. And, like people make a bad, changes. And so they come back in and it's just sounded so sloppy and really bad. And Lanois gets kind of upset about all this stuff because the key changes. And he says, it's sounding so junky. If you don't know the changes, don't play, And so that's what happened. And when he said, it sounded so junky, Keltner's like, oh, he goes, is that East Coast junky or West Coast junky? You're like, oh, geez, here we go. That was pretty funny. So yeah, so it got a little bit out of hand on that record too, where Dan had, was kind of pitching to get back to that Can't Wait vibe, and we'd already cut Can't Wait, and we did 3 different types of versions, and we ended up with like this Pink Floyd-y kind of like more drugged out sounding one. And then there was a ragdoll one that was kind of like loosely kind of held together. And so we ended up using that. And so Lanois wasn't happy with it. And Bob was like, we did it, it's done. And so one day Dan's working up the band before Bob got in, and Lanois would like mime him in the mic. I can't wait. Bob walks right in. Like, what the fuck you guys doing? He goes, oh, just trying to get back to that gospel version. He goes, it's done. And Dan says, well, I really love that version of we had. And he said, Tony, get over here. And Tony, the bass player, Tony Garnier, goes, Tony, how often do I ever do something the same twice? Never, Bob. I never seen you do anything the same, Bob. Right? And so it got into this whole heated thing where Bob wouldn't talk to Lanois anymore. And so I'd be sitting at the console with Bob, and Bob would, and then Lanois would lean over and say, sounding great, guys. Sounding really good. And Bob would turn to me and goes, you hear somebody talking? And I said, no. And it got to this point where it was just like, where Lanois kind of got exiled from the studio, and Bob would only talk to me, and Lanois would come to me to tell what to say to Bob. And then, so after Dylan walked in when we were working up that version of Can't Wait, Dylan picks up an acoustic guitar and he's holding it by the neck with the body out on this side and then this leg. And he's like swinging it. And, like, I think he's going to hit him. He's going to hit him. And it didn't happen. And so the vibe just changed, and Lanois brought in his brother, Bob Lanois, to do some filming. And so he thought, wow, I'm going to like put candles all over the whole studio. And he spent $1,000 on candles, and he's got the whole place lit, like with this thing. And it looks pretty, pretty crazy. And so like 4:00 rolls around and Bob walks in the back door of the studio and goes, what the fuck's going on here? It looks like there's a seance in here. Turn these fucking candles off. Put the lights on. Bob was fired. They sent him home the next day. It was all terrible. Anyways, he had already gotten some footage from those sessions, so I think that was pretty cool. But in the end, it was kind of everybody was getting sent home separately, and Tony was the first to go, and then a couple other people left, and so it was down to like a core of guys. And so we brought in Keltner. Jim Keltner came in, but Dan wanted to have somebody on his team, so he brought in Brian Blade, this jazz drummer from New Orleans. And so they set up their 2 kits side by side, and luckily Brian, he's like, jazz drummer, so he kind of took care of the hi-hats deal. And then Keltner just had a shaker.
Is that right?
And so I just had one stereo mic split between the 2 of them, and then one Coles mic in front of them. So it was like 3 mics. Because, there's so many people, and we're working on 24 tracks, so I can't spend many mics on the kit. So, and then a lot of the sound of the room was coming through the vocal mic, and I had a delay on it, flange, and all this kind of crazy weird stuff. So I think that record sounds that way because it was in that room, and it sounds pretty open, and there's a real depth of feel to the way it sounds. And I was very embarrassed a little bit the way it sounded because I got such a great sound at the Teatro, and then there I thought this doesn't sound nearly as good as what I had there, and but
You still feel that way?
well, I feel differently now that time has set in, but for a while I just didn't really think I had done my best work.
And then at what point do you realize that? Because it sounded like it was there's a lot of tension in the environment. But at what point do you realize this is solidifying into something that's really special?
Well, first of all, like once we finished the record, we didn't know whether this would even be a record. And so, because Dan didn't want a copy of what we'd done, and I gave Bob a cassette. And so we packed up and everybody left, and we never heard from Bob for months. And we thought, okay, it's done. We haven't heard from him. I guess it's not going to be a record. So I got a call from Bob in the middle of the night, and he goes, "Mark, what do you think? Do we got a record?" And I said, "Yeah, I think you should come back in. Let's finish it." And he said, "Oh, really?" I said, "I don't know." And like he was humming and hawing. So I said, "Yeah, just come back up, and we'll take care of it. Let's listen to what we got, and let's make a opinion on what's going on." So he doesn't show up. Another couple months pass, and he calls me up again. He goes, "Mark, I've been listening to the record. I was playing it for my friend in Santa Monica in his apartment. I got a knock at the door, and some guy, the neighbor from down below, had heard it through the wall. He goes, 'What are you guys listening to? Like, I got to get a copy of that.'" And so my friend told him that, just my friend's record. It's not even out, nothing. And so Bob calls me and tells me about this. And I said, "Yeah, Bob, it's amazing. You got to get back in here." So the record was never, it was shelved, I thought, at a certain point. And then once he came back in, we started working it and seeing what we got. And that's when certain playbacks from Miami, I couldn't better the sound. Like there's a song called Lovesick. And so it comes on and voice is just like in your face. And I was always like trying to, when they came back in, I trying to like excite the band, and I put flange on Bob's voice and an echo. And so like just make it sound as strange as possible. And so I just print a mix of that to a thing called a DAT, digital audio tape. And so that's how we worked in those days. We print instead of half-inch, it was the DAT machine. And so I printed it there, and then I tried to remix it, and I just kept on putting that old mix on, and that's the mix that's on the record. When the band came back in the room, I did the playback, and that's it. And so we used that. That's the first song on that record. And if you ever listen to that record, listen to the very first 3 songs, and you start to notice like each one of them all start with "I'm walking." As I'm walking down these streets, I'm walking. Yeah. So it's kind of crazy that I never realized that until somebody pointed it out to me. So, and I made the record, but yeah, Bob would always come to me because I'd write his lyrics in my book, and so he didn't have any lyrics on paper. So he was always like looking over my shoulder to see what's in there, and I always write the first word and the last word. And every time I'd listen back, I'd fill it in, bang, 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 bang. So I had like a copy of the lyrics. And there was a song called Highlands, and it's 17 minutes long. And I was working on these big, huge 14-inch reels on a 2-inch tape recorder, and they only lasted 17 minutes. And so Highlands is 17 minutes. And so we did 2 versions of that. And so we ended up picking the one that's on the record, but there's a whole other version that has completely different lyrics of Highlands. And so Bob would say to me, "Go to the 15th verse and pop me in for the 3rd word." I'm like, Luckily, I had taken numbers on each of the verses and I knew where I was in the song. Cause, when you're working on a 2-inch tape, you don't have a waveform. You don't have any sight stuff.
Mhm.
You have to know where it is in your head or take numbers off the tape recorder and stuff like that. So I'd taken numbers of all the little sections. So, but because Bob doesn't want to wear headphones, I had to put 2 speakers in front of him out on the floor. And then I had to pipe the music through the speakers. And then I had to have another mic that was beside him because when I punched him to record, I had to take his voice out. So he was only hearing his voice come out of the vocal amp. And so because of that, I had to punch in to record, take down his vocal, turn up the microphone that's in the room so I could hear him sing. And when he stopped after that word, I had to punch him out. And so it was like this kind of like crazy kind of thing to do where just to get out.
And he's not doing anything the same twice, right?
Yeah. So I punch him in for that. And 2 inches, like once you punch in, there's no undo or anything. So you got to make sure you get in and out without cutting the vocal off or the breath, So he decided to have a little fun with me. He go like, can you go to the 6th verse and go in for the very second to last line? And so I'm like, yep. And out like, and so I just like, he's never had anybody, be able to do that with him that can, so he not that he was testing me, he was just having fun with it. So
you shared an anecdote previously about Dylan and the pianos in the studio and why he chose a specific piano that he liked.
Oh, that was on Oh Mercy.
Mercy.
Yeah. So we had prepped for that record and with with instruments and stuff like that. And so it was a beautiful kind of like, Victorian mansion with pillars. It was the room that we had that we thought we were going to record in. It didn't happen. We recorded in the kitchen but I had 3 pianos in a row. It was like a 1980s Steinway C size. And then there was an old Steinway, like an 1800 Steinway. And then there was a Baldwin piano we got from the local music store. And so we had them all lined up. And so Bob would always go in and he'd play the Baldwin. And Lamlaw got, excited that he was like, what, got up the nerve to go to Bob and say, Bob, like, every time you come in the room, like, why do you pick the Baldwin? Do you like the action? I want to buy one of these pianos. Like, we're just wondering, why you keep coming to the Baldwin? And Dylan turns around to him and he goes, because it's the only one with a stool. So we all had a good laugh about it. And then there was a song called Ring Them Bells.
Yeah.
And so, I think so it's on piano. And so ring them bells. And I think there's a line and the fighting was strong, but the way he sang it and his phrasing, it sounded like, and the fighting was strong. And so every time we heard it, we'd laugh. He's like, why do you always laugh when that part goes by? And we said, yeah, it's just, he never fixed it. If you still listen to it, it sounds like that. But yeah, it was an interesting record because I had beautiful, huge kind of ballroom set up with these pianos, and I built
about the Oh Mercy
record, yeah. And so that room, I built a drum booth with sandbags and double glass sliding doors. And I figured, it'll be isolated, at least with the drums. And we never even went in that room and recorded in there, except for the piano song. And then the whole record was made in the kitchen dining room. And so it was, we always just ended up there. So that's where we recorded it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And after Time Out of Mind was released and got its critical acclaim, when you look back on those sessions, did it have a different perspective, how it all came together?
Yeah, like it won, 3 Grammys, and it really, I think something happens with time, like I'm in there and so I'm so used to it. And then when you have time away from it and then you listen to it again, like you really understand and respect it. But with the microscope on it all the time. Like you can only see certain parts of it because you're in there deep. And so it takes some time to set back from these records. And same with Oh Mercy. It took, a good 10 years for that one to land. And I think now it's a lot of people's favorite and classic too.
I mean, those two are the pinnacles of Dylan's catalog in the last 30 plus years.
But on Time Out of Mind, after it was done, Bob got sick and he had some kind of lung infection. And so he went into hospital. And so he was calling me really high on pills, and he would ask requests. He was requesting like changes in the songs and stuff like that. It's to do some edits for him. So there was a song, I think I called it Doing All Right. And I think it was called what's it called? Till a Year. I can't remember what the name was. But he asked me, he said, can you take the first verse and put it in the last verse? Take the last verse and put it in the first verse. And this is while I'm mastering the record. And so I do that. I make a cassette, run it over to his house, drop it off. He listens to it. And I go to mastering and we put that in there. And then I drop off the mastering and he goes, no, it's not right. He goes, why don't you try taking the first verse and just getting rid of the first? And so I did that edit and took it over to him. And so that was, he went with that version, but he didn't like the sound of the mastering. So I was in there for a month almost mastering the record because I had made these cassettes. What were they called? Maxell XL2S. In those days, those were the hot. You could really pin those meters, and make it sound exciting. And so he had this cassette he had been living with. And every time I went from the mastering, he'd put the cassette in, put the CD in his box, and then he'd have his tape there. And so he goes, you know what? It sounds good at 7, but not at 9. Oh, what does that mean? And so I go back in and we would run the whole record through like a lathe, through like a vinyl lathe to capture some kind of analog sound. And so drop off a cassette CD at his house. And he goes, no, the cassette still sounds better. And I'm thinking, shit. And we tried everything, and like all these different EQs and compression. And like, he hated it all. And so I said, that's it. I don't know what else to do, but I'm going to take the cassette deck into the mastering with me. It was a Tascam D30 or something like that. And so I put the cassette deck on the mastering desk, and Joe Gasworth was mastering it. He goes, what's that? I go, this is the sound. And we put in all his millions of dollars worth of gear. We couldn't get close to this cassette deck. So that whole record was mastered through a cassette deck.
Amazing.
And so that's why it sounds a little bit like how it sounds. Yeah. So it's got a real kind of, open, kind of beautiful sound.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing these amazing stories versus Time Out of Mind. This is part 1. We're going to have a part 2 coming with Mark, and we're going to talk about Neil Young's Lanois, and we're going to talk about Tom Waits' Real Gone. So thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.
And we'll see you guys soon. Please rate and subscribe. Thank you.
Thank you.